It is time, everyone, for our annual PlayStation Predictions video. One of my favorite things to do every year when the new year starts, and as always, we will grade myself from last year, see how I did, and then give 10 new predictions for the PlayStation business, their games, hardware, services, what Sony may or may not do for the 2023 calendar year. So, as usual, we will grade myself first from last year, and if you want to jump right to the brand new predictions, timestamp right there, or you can check out the YouTube skimmer where they'll be numbered out individually. But let's grade myself from 2022, where I didn't really do that good. So, there's a good amount of misses in here, but, we'll get into the minutia of what I said. So first, the sales predictions, we always do that first. PS4, I said 117.3 million, and PS5, 36 million consoles sold by the end of 2022. So the results is that PS4 is at around 117.2 million. Now, the caveat here is that that was our last reported number, which was quite a bit ago, but that was because Sony has now stopped reporting PS4 numbers, likely because they're hardly moving anything. In fact, the last active quarter that Sony did report, they only moved 100,000 PS4 consoles. Now, we do know they're still selling more of them, though, because the most recent wave of bundles that went out were for God of War Ragnarok and Modern Warfare 2, so there is still new PS4s being put out there. People can buy them, but I suspect that is the last wave of PS4 brand new consoles that one can buy in what was late 2022 and possibly going into 2023. So they might be closer to 117.3. I think I'm fairly close on that, but I think we're just splitting hairs. PS5 though, this is where it's always tough to grade because it's an active console, and we're always in that weird spot where we do these videos right into the new year. We have to wait until their next financial report to get that confirmed number of what they actually sold. We have to work off the last quarter, the last financial report, and do some guesswork on, the holiday period and where we think they are, right? So the last official number for PS5 was 25 million, which is a pretty big delta from, 25 the last quarter to, possibly selling upwards of 36. Now, I can already tell you they're not going to reach that number, partly because so far in this current fiscal year, they sold 6.5 million, and they still expect to sell 18 million total, which means they're looking to do another 11.5 million, but their fiscal years run from April to April, right? So even if they sell 11.5 million, that's for the full financial year, so that would be something where they wouldn't hit 36 million until March 2023. You know what I mean? So they're not going to hit 36, even if they somehow miraculously sold that many PS5s, or possibly even more PS5s. I think they're around currently 31 million, and we'll find out soon enough, but I was fairly off on that. I just thought that, they would keep up with PS5 or PS4 rate of sale, and also I was a bit more bullish on just how many more consoles they were going to be able to make, but who knows? We'll see. Anyway, my number 2 prediction was the revamped PS Plus, lots of PS1, some PS2 and PSP games, PS3 would be streamed, PS4 and PS5 catalog is like an expanded PS Plus collection, and game trials for recent games. So, I'm bummed that I was not right about the classic games, because I would love to be right about that. It's just that was way off the mark. It's been an abysmal rollout for PS1 and PSP games, and there has been no brand new PS2 titles. We've only got the ones from the 2016 program. PS3 titles are still streamed. I think that was an easy W. I'm not really going to take much credit for that. And I did have to rewatch the video to understand the context of PS4 and PS5 catalog is like an expanded Plus collection. I was still saying more or less that, PS Now's 200-something PS4 games will get rolled over, which is partly true. That's what it is. It's a collection of, 200-300-something games. I think now they're up to, 400 between PS4 and 5. So, really, it's a lot more, but PS4, PS5 games, I guess that's true to an extent. And game trials for recent games, yeah. But going into number 3, next-gen PSVR formal reveal around GDC time, or basically before GDC was the point I was trying to get across. It would be consumer-focused to showcase hardware and software, and also there would be PC support. No PC support, I think that is a detriment to PSVR 2. Not only PSVR 2 as a standalone headset that would possibly be something people could buy for PS5 or PC, but a detriment to the VR landscape as a whole. I do wish they would support PC, but I digress. The point is, at least this was partly true in that we saw more PSVR 2 and we had kind of a formal reveal before GDC, which was a... Unfortunately, it was a blog post, no kind of consumer-focused event per se, but we did see the headset get official details and things like that in February, right before GDC in March, which was the main point I was trying to get across. Number 4 was VR-focused acquisitions announced, which could be things like Camouflage, Polyarc. Other acquisitions could include Elphonic, Ember Labs, Arrowhead Game Studios. I try to put a few in there so we didn't eat up like a bunch of predictions, and you'll see that for the next one. But this was all wrong as well. So Camouflage was acquired by Meta. Polyarc, no. Elphonic, no. Ember Labs, no. Arrowhead, no. None of that happened. Now, Sony did make some acquisitions, but it was none of that. So we'll talk more about that later. But going into number 5, game reveals for, and again, kind of a bullet point thing here, The Last of Us Factions, The Last of Us Remake, Twisted Metal, Gorilla Second Team, Firewalk Studios, and Firesprite. Boy, talk about wrong. Left and right. The only one in there was The Last of Us Remake being revealed and launched within the same year. That's fine, but I think the big problem with this reveal or this prediction, and I'm not going to use it again, but basically I think I'm like a year behind on nearly all these. I think they're all pretty much due to be revealed around sometime within the next 12 months. So I think the big problem is I was just a year off on like all those, because now we're hearing more about them and we're seeing job listings. We're getting an idea of what these games are. So I think that was the core issue with that one. But let me stop myself right there, because for some reason when filming, I just skipped over number 6, so let's do that now. The Last of Us Factions and Twisted Metal are games as a service. They'll have a Battle Royale mode, they'll be world-changing, seasonal updates, things like that. Now, I can't be right when these things are not officially revealed, but like the last one, I just think I was a bit too early, so I'm sure this will be true very soon, but for now, I was wrong. Anyway, let's just keep going with the video here. Number 7, I said Bloodborne PC and PS5 announced and shipped within the year. Exhaustingly, no, but we'll move on. Number 8, I said PC games ramp up, but PlayStation Mobile falls flat. So half right, PC games ramped up. We saw them do plenty of PC releases. They're going to keep doing that into this year as well, so just working more on that back catalog, and now we have a good idea of how they're going to approach it, where it might be a 1-year delay for standard, first party, let's say single player stuff, but when it comes to any live service game, that can be day and date on PS5, PC, and possibly PS4 if they're going to humor a PS4 release. But for PS Mobile falling flat, so I'm kind of glad that this was not right, because basically it was kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, they're going to do more mobile stuff, but they're going to do it the same way they've done it before, where they just put out all these games and use PlayStation IP and nobody cares about them and they have to discontinue them. And we initially saw that with the Wipeout game that came out of nowhere, so I was like, oh, they're already doing it to an extent. But really, not much happened. We saw them really work towards building this division, which is the PlayStation Studios mobile division, so kind of a family next to the standard PS Studios wheelhouse. So this is something where they appointed a head to it, which is Nicola Sebastiani from Apple Arcade. They're doing a lot of hiring. They're building a team. They acquired Savage Game Studios, a brand new mobile studio developer. So they're building it, and I think they're building it in a good way. So I'm hoping that perhaps this coming year we'll see something that is quite meaningful in the mobile space. Even if you don't care, it's something where if you're going to do mobile games, do it right. Going into number 9, I said Sony skips the E3 timeframe again and sticks to state of plays in the PS blog, but I also said there would be 2 major live streams for the year. Now, some could argue that the 2 state of plays were actually quite big and I think surprised a lot of people. That and Sony also had a fairly large presence at the Game Awards. So they had a lot of stuff to say this past year. They could have done a live stream that has kind of like a different name, a PlayStation Showcase, if you will, but they did not do that once this year. Which is why, in fairness, this should be kind of a half-right thing. They mostly stuck to the PS blog and Twitter and things like that. And then number 10, I said, a surprise no one sees coming. Now, that's kind of a cop-out answer, but my point was that, Sony is generally pretty good at keeping secrets, or at least big secrets. And so whether it was, and I had to rewatch to understand the context of what I was trying to get across, which I think I was mostly talking about game announcements. And I think that you could argue that there was something there like Rise of the Ronin or whatever, but I think really what was the big surprise from last year was the Bungie acquisition. So not sure if that really counts as to what I was getting at, but it was genuinely surprising, I think, to a lot of people. Now, we all know why they did it. They explained it. It's just that, for what is kind of a big deal and like, a former Microsoft studio, a well-known Microsoft associated studio, now they're doing Destiny, and look, PlayStation's picking up a fairly well-known, large third-party dev that puts out a property that's on multiple platforms, but Sony confirmed right away that they're going to keep them largely independent. I think that whole situation, which kind of came and went, and nobody after the initial shock, it was like, oh, okay, whatever, but it was genuinely surprising when it happened. Now, having said all that, let's get into our brand new predictions for 2023, and when it comes to sales, I'm going to say PS5 is going to reach a worldwide total of 58 million consoles sold by the end of this year. Now, that sounds like a lot, pretty much nearly as many as they've sold so far. But this year is something where they're finally reaching wide PS5 availability, as in there's no more production bottlenecks. We're finally going to get to a point where you can go to a store or online and buy a PS5 whenever you want. Now, you still can't do that just yet. It depends on the timing and where you are, if you're in a big city, but mostly we're going to get there this year. That's huge. And also, this number is largely coming from, or it's loosely based off of Tom Henderson's recent report from, having a new PS5 detachable disk drive model coming around fall next year, or fall this year, I should say. And how Sony also has an internal target of selling 30.5 million consoles for fiscal year 2023. Now, remember, the fiscal year runs into what would be March 2024, but that's still a boatload of consoles to be sold within what is a peak year for the console. And Tom's generally had very good, reliable info when it comes to PlayStation news. He's one of the very few that has it. So, I trust that he's got some good info, but that still doesn't mean they're going to sell all of that, right? So we have to do some guesswork on that holiday period and how they're going to typically sell a lot of consoles during that time, but there's still going to be, 4 or 5 million that they'll do into 2024 and kind of chop up that number from there, and that's where I came to 58 million, so we will see. PSVR 2, very exciting. A new headset launching in February, so we get to start tracking a brand new piece of PlayStation hardware, and this is where it's going to be extremely tough to predict this because, well, for a number of reasons. So I do suspect that it will do better than PSVR. I think that much is a certainty. If it doesn't, this would be a big failure, I think, in the eyes of Sony and many, but it took PSVR about a little over a year to sell 2 million units, which, Sony was only doing million milestone announcements for PSVR, and that's why we had to stop tracking it after 5 million, because they never gave us a new number, probably because it never even reached 6, I imagine, but I'm going to say 2.5 million. That would put it at a pace where it's certainly faster than PSVR, a slightly higher attach rate that PSVR had with PS4 back in the day. It's just a little bit better, and I think that's good enough. I think Sony would be happy with it. We're hearing that they're making about 2 million for launch, which I don't think they're going to get through that entire launch stock if they do make 2 million. But 2.5 by the end. I mean, there's still a lot of things working against it. The price tag, how consumers are very mindful of what they're spending their money on nowadays. the launch lineup is not that great, so there's some hurdles, but let's say 2.5. Number 2, slim PS5 with detachable disk drive launches in September. Leaks beforehand, and also the disk drive costs $100, no PS5 Pro. So I'm going to add all those in there. So again, going back to Tom's report, I think he's been very credible. I can see it happening. It's just that the leaks beforehand is the thing I want to really press on here, because how Sony always does this with any sort of, somewhat major or significant console redesign, they always announce and launch fairly early, as in it hits retail, shortly after they announce. And because when they do that, that means that we get, spy shots or these potato images from a bare shell that was maybe, on the production line or something. I think we'll see this thing before Sony gives us a formal announcement. So if it is anything like previous slim PlayStations or even a slight redesign, it should be something like that, and I think they'll pretty much charge the price delta of whatever, whatever PS5 costs in your area. The difference is going to be to pay for that disk drive, and that's, I think that might even see a bit of heat or controversy, but obviously they're going to charge the difference. And no PS5 Pro, I've been very outspoken about that. I don't think there's going to be any noteworthy leaks, no rumors, and again, like, credible, noteworthy ones. PS5 Pro is just, it's not going to happen. Not this year. I don't think the following year, maybe 2025, but at that point, I feel like you should just be waiting for PlayStation 6. But going into number 3, PlayStation acquires Deviation Games. So what we saw Sony do with their acquisitions, there was a basic formula of, are they a long-standing PlayStation partner? Are they reliable? Have they put out good software for you? And that's where Sony likes to tie the knot. After they took up all these, they bought all the partners that, made sense. We saw them go into a new direction of picking up studios that are, say, fairly new, or, well, at least with Bungie, that's the one little outlier where they are planned to be integrated with Sony's live service plans. But, when it comes to things like Firesprite or Haven, they're fairly new. Haven's extremely fresh, and I think Deviation's kind of the same thing, where based on their progress on their current project, I don't think we're going to see it. I think we're just going to see Sony pick them up after finalizing a deal. Sony's been very strategic in how they spend their money, so they're not doing this kind of aggressive, looking for IP kind of thing like Microsoft is doing. That's not how Sony does it. They look for talent. So Deviation has a lot of talent, and they're expanding quite rapidly as well, and you got to figure that Sony's probably playing a pretty big role there, and perhaps they'll fall into the Haven situation of Sony just thinks it's a good deal right off the bat. And that goes into number 4. Sony makes a strategic investment in Square Enix. So we've also talked about this for a while, which is that slight rumor, and that it's always like hard to even humor a rumor anymore about acquisitions, because nobody seems to really know these things right up until they finally happen. But, the running theory with Square was that Sony was going to buy Square Enix, and then they sold off their Western studios, which the theory then became that Square is trying to look attractive to a buyer. But then nothing happened until we saw Square be very forward about how they're looking to partner with outside publishers to bear the same amount of risk when it comes to, making games and funding new projects and new IP. And so I think that's kind of a best case scenario for both Square and Sony, because Sony doesn't necessarily want all the baggage that Square comes with. Sony's just looking really to get, I would assume, the Final Fantasy franchise out of them. We know that they're keeping that IP very close to them by locking FF7 Remake and also Rebirth away from at least Xbox platforms. Also, they could do something with Luminous Productions. I think that's going to be highly dependent on how well Forspoken actually does. There's a number of ways in which this can look. I'm not going to get too specific here on how much the investment will be and into what part of Square, but I think generally it's going to be a pretty sizable investment and something where it sort of locks in that the Final Fantasy franchise and possibly also whatever Luminous is going to be up to after, say, Forspoken, where they're going to be looking at new IP and things like that. But that seems like the best case scenario for Sony and Square. Number 5, the Activision Blizzard deal stalls, Microsoft continues to fight, and Sony continues objecting to the deal. So basically what we've seen thus far, going to continue. That's it basically, which we kind of already know based on the FTC. So, it seems like there's no chance this is going to close or have some sort of resolution by June 2023 unless Microsoft, say, backs out. That's the only way in which I see this, say, coming to a resolution, is Microsoft saying, okay, we're done, we're walking away, we'll pay the fine, and that's it. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to, continue doing what they can. So even if the FTC, even if they work out something with them, there's still the CMA and the EU, which we should find out what they're going to do with their Phase 2 investigations fairly soon in, February and March. So we should find out fairly soon and get a good idea of how long this may take, but I don't think we're going to see a resolution anytime soon. And Sony will continue to play a role just in that they're not going to accept any sort of deal. I'm not sure how many more public statements we're really going to get out of them unless we see more things published via the CMA and the EU, the FTC. If they do more of that, we'll see Sony continue doing what they've been doing. Number 6, a new PS2 emulator arrives with basic save state, rewind, and video filters. The rollout is still slow. So, more or less, the reason why we have not had a new PS2 game is likely because they're just doing a new emulator from the ground up. We already see that the one that they built for PS4 has some compatibility issues on PS5 because, you have to remember these games are still considered PS4 executables. They're not native PS5 games technically like we see with the updated emulators for PS1 and PSP games. There's also the security flaw with some of those PS2 games that have JIT privileges on PS5. So I think the reason why we just have not seen any new PS2 games is that they're doing an emulator that is going to be more or less, feature complete with what we have for the PS1 and PSP games. So nothing crazy. I think once it finally shows up, same rollout where it's 1 or 2 games here, there. I'm not hopeful for 2023 when it comes to PS Plus Premium, but we should have PS2 games finally come back. Number 7, Sony returns to the E3 timeframe with a major live stream or showcase. So this one I feel is a little bit spicy in that it is time for Sony to maybe come back with a traditional, big showcase, right? So I think the wait has been long enough. Fans are waiting. I think Sony's just they're also waiting to get to a point where they feel comfortable with the amount of things that they can reasonably show, because Sony is in a place where they don't want to have to reveal a game and then spend the next 2-3 years doing more PlayStation showcases and also state of plays or PS blogs, showing the same game over and over again. It seems like they do want to be a bit closer to when these games are ready to be released. That way they can start a proper marketing cycle. So I think you're going to have a handful of games that get announced, teased, but otherwise Sony will give a good roadmap on games that are coming out in the next 6 to 12 months. And of course, by the E3 timeframe, that would be something where, that stretches into 2024 naturally. But I think, and that's not saying we're not going to get state of plays or the typical PS blog stuff, or let's say another live stream in September, or maybe, some folks are theorizing one is going to come a bit earlier, so let's say around February or March. I just think it's time to, around June, near E3, but still on their own terms, for them to have their own, big live stream that fans can get really excited about. Number 8, I don't like doing repeats, but I'll always do it at least for one extra year, and it's gotta happen. Bloodborne, PS5, PC, they're not dumb. Sony is not... They understand people want this game. They want it on PS5. They want it on PC. And you don't have to go crazy. Just 4K, 60 FPS. Update some textures. I mean, you don't have to do a lot. People are not asking for much. It's a PS4 game. And for as much flack as Sony gets for, revisiting late lifecycle PS4 games or late lifecycle PS3 games, but this is the one game where I'm shocked that they've not gotten to it just yet. I think it is bound to happen eventually. So let's say they'll reveal it and they'll confirm it for next year, so 2024. It won't launch this year, but they'll at least confirm it. Number 9, Santa Monica teases their new IP with no release window. This might be more in line with what we saw for Wolverine. I think when it comes to their second project, which now they can, put a lot more resources into, and it seems like they've already had a lot of hiring going on for this project anyway, which we assume is Cory Barlog's either fantasy or space game. There's a lot of theories, and there's some that make a lot of sense, but just in theory, this new game that they're doing, put it out there. Just let the world get a taste of what it is, because with Santa Monica, they've done God of War for most of the studio's history, and I think coming off of Ragnarok, it would be really exciting to at least get a small taste of what's coming from what is such a world-renowned studio that has this this massive reputation for putting out this incredible line of games that have just been this one series. And there was another IP they were doing a while ago that was canceled, so it would be really exciting to see and just at least know, like, here's a splash screen, here's a title, here's a few short seconds of what we're up to, and I think that would be really cool, and I think that's something they will do this year. Number 10, a UI refresh comes via a system software update around fall, and there's still no themes. So I just don't think Sony's going to get to that feature, at least not this year, but I do think that they might do something similar to PS4 where, and I think people tend to forget this happened, but when PS4 launched, it had its own little look and feel and dynamic background when the console was stock, and they did change that a few years in. So that might happen with PS5. I don't know how they'll approach it. Maybe they'll make the home screen icons like solid squares again instead of the rounded edges. Just that I expect them to maybe make more notable visual changes in, let's say, a larger way than we've seen thus far with PS5, but still no themes, as in, like, they're just not, I don't think they want to deal with them anymore. I think that's the big part of it, but that's essentially it. So those are my 10 2023 PlayStation predictions. We try to get a good spread on the entire PlayStation business, and again, there are some predictions from last year that I do think will happen this year, but I don't want to rerun all of them. Just that, look at everything holistically, and I think that's what a lot of this stuff should happen in theory. We'll see. We'll always grade myself in 2024, but until then, that is it. So thank you so much for watching. If you haven't just yet, please consider subscribing for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, and that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.